Hey there, glad to have you back for another episode of Practical Stoicism. Before we begin, I would like to thank the 12 of you who have thus far left reviews for this podcast in the few weeks since I've started it. It's still early days, of course, but these reviews are really encouraging for me. I wasn't exactly sure how a podcast like this would be received, and I'm glad to see, again at least thus far, that you seem to be enjoying it. If you are enjoying this program but have not yet left a review, I hope you'll take a moment to do so. As I said before, reviews can help convince first-timers coming across Practical Stoicism to go from non-listener to first-time listener, and that's really helpful to me. You can leave reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, or on podchaser.com by searching for Practical Stoicism. And with that, let's get on to the fourth meditation of Marcus Aurelius, which reads as follows. Remember how long you've been putting this off, how many extensions the gods have given you, and how you haven't used them. At some point, you have to recognize what world it is you belong to, what power rules it, and from what source you spring, that there is a limit to the time assigned to you, and if you don't use it to free yourself, it will be gone and will never return. Of the meditations reviewed thus far, in fact, of all the meditations in these books, none hit home more for me than this one. This is probably the meditation that stopped me as a young atheist years ago from putting the book down after just having picked it up a few moments earlier. I wonder how you feel hearing it now. Remember how long you've been putting this off, how many extensions the gods have given you, and that you haven't used them. Think of all the times you've said something akin to, I'm going to get such and such about my life in order. I'm running out of time. I've just got to do it. If you've said that a lot, it means you've spent a lot of time aware of something you found problematic and that needed solving or changing, but you procrastinated acting on it. Perhaps you are still procrastinating acting on it. For me, personally, it's about getting healthy. As I get older, I know that working out and getting my body in better shape will only get harder and harder the longer I put off starting. But here I am, still, for the most part, putting it off. Maybe your thing is the same thing. I think the whole getting healthy thing is a pretty common struggle as we get older for many people. Or maybe it's different. But what Marcus is telling us here in this first line is that we're going to die. We're going to die, we have no idea when, and we've been fortunate to live as long as we have up to now. He's telling us we should recognize all of this, and that we should then look at what we're procrastinating and finally do something about it before it's too late. A few years ago, I came across this chart you could buy online, and I'll link it in the show notes if I can find it. I'll probably be able to find it, so check the show notes so you can see this yourself. All it was a series of small squares, or maybe they were circles. Anyway, they were arranged in rows and columns, totaling what seemed like a large number of circles or squares. Every single square was equal to 1 week, and every row was equal to something like 3 years. The idea was that using this chart, you could shade in the squares as the weeks of your life passed. The chart started at 0 years old and ended at 90 years old. It was a way of seeing how much time you had left if you were going to live to be 90. Now, 90 years old is not the average lifespan for anyone living in the United States, which is where I'm based. For us, the average is about 79 years. Globally, it's only 73 years, if we're rounding up. So this chart was a little more generous with the suggested amount of time you might live if something didn't go wrong. But still, it was pretty powerful to have this visual aid, because it's easy to find comfort in a thought like, I've got another 40 years. That's plenty of time. It's a lot harder to find the same amount of comfort in, I've got 20 rows left until I die, and to look at it and to see that maybe perhaps 50% of your life has already passed, or for some of us, because we don't know when we will die, far more than that. It was a very strong visual aid for being constantly aware of the fact that nothing was promised, that nothing is promised. Now, I am sure that this all sounds pretty morbid, but Marcus's message is one worth keeping in mind whenever we consider the things we've been putting off. Do we ever really want to get to them? Or are we lying to ourselves? If we're not lying to ourselves and we do really want to get to these things, then we should act like we're running out of time, because we are. and none of us know how quickly we are running out of that time. Returning to the meditation, at some point you have to recognize what world it is you belong to, what power rules it, and from what source you spring. This part reminds me of being a young man and feeling as though I needed to fit in where people wanted me to fit in and not where I wanted to fit in or felt drawn to fit in. All of us have some kind of identity, and I feel that, in truth, we know it much more early on than probably we suspect, but we struggle to enforce it among our peers and among our family members for fear of being ostracized or looked poorly upon. Perhaps your family has a history of sons and daughters who become lawyers or doctors, or maybe they are people who go into the military or some other career that is just the way that your family has always done things. But you don't want to be any of those things. Instead, you want to be a teacher, a grade school teacher or a high school teacher or a kindergarten teacher. It can feel pretty terrifying to stand up to all that history and tradition and say, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this other thing. And I think in the earlier parts of our adulthood, it's very easy to start down a path that isn't the one we prefer. And a lot of it has to do with that pressure, that fear of being ostracized or looked down on. I personally know a lot of men and women between 40 and 50 who feel trapped in careers that they never wanted, but that they are now too deeply rooted in to change. Or at least this is how they tell me they feel. From personal experience, I know that the longer we are stuck where we don't want to be, the harder it is to escape it. But remember, you're going to die. Do you want to die like this? Do you want to die having never disrupted your lack of fulfillment? Marcus is telling us that at some point, we've got to realize that the source from which we spring, and by that he means the thing which is our motivation and our deepest love, we've got to get in alignment with it, or we're going to die miserably. Again, returning to the meditation, that there is a limit to the time assigned to you, and if you don't use it to free yourself, it will be gone and will never return. So again, you're going to die. No matter what your personal philosophy is, this is one of the few truths that have absolutely zero regard for it. Your mortal life will end. Your ability to improve, to change, to have impact, that's going to go away. And it could be today, as you sit at your desk and suffer a heart attack seemingly out of nowhere, perhaps while you are listening to this podcast. And just some real quick personal stories from me to drive that point home. I had a friend of mine a couple of years ago who literally dropped dead at the age of 49 from an undetected aneurysm. When I was in my late teens, my friend Dave, who we called Flava Flav for whatever reason, died after being hit by a drunk driver. In fact, everyone involved died, all of differing ages, but Dave couldn't have been more than 20 at the time. When I was around 7 or 8, a boy down the street from my grandmother's house, who I was friends with, was hit by a car while playing near the street outside his house in what was probably somewhere between suburban and rural Connecticut. It was a hit and run, and the driver was never caught. All of us could go today, or tomorrow, or in 40 years. But whenever we go, none of us have advanced knowledge about when exactly that's going to be. All we know is that our time will run out, that it is running out right now. And as Marcus says, if we don't use the time we have right now to do the things we know are important to us and important to those around us, that time will be gone and it will never return. So you're going to die. What do you want to make sure you do before that happens? Marcus, of course, is talking about getting a hold of your chaotic mind and taming it, taming yourself, because all of this is in reference to Stoicism, the Stoic philosophy. But this is a piece of advice that, and perhaps this is one of the reasons it's such a meaningful piece of advice for me, is broadly applicable. And if you're not already employing it in your daily life, I hope that you'll start right now. As always, I appreciate you spending a little bit of your time here with me each week, and I hope you find utility in these brief episodes. If you'd like to review this podcast, you can do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, or Podchaser.com. If you have questions, thoughts, or ideas for the Practical Stoicism podcast, please email them to me via Tanner@tannerhelps.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, take care.